Okay, we're here with Jill Frederickson, Vice President, Sports Center and News Editorial Operations. Jill, I've been asking everyone, just tell us how you got to how does someone get to ESPN? What was the road that you took?
Well, I was a sports fan. So I think like most of us who start here, I was a sports fan. I grew up in Indianapolis. I went out to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway when I was about 14 years old, fell in love with the sport of auto racing, decided that I wanted to do something in it. And so I eventually tried different things, eventually worked for a production company in Indianapolis that predominantly produced racing for ESPN. So I worked there for several years, then was hired as a freelance producer for ESPN, and then eventually came to ESPN in Bristol in 2003 as the coordinating producer of motorsports coverage.
And we talk. ESPN has this. When you look at motorsports in the United States and NASCAR, talk a little bit about the impact that ESPN. Not only did you work it, but obviously when you were growing up and you're kind of ESPN. Really was huge as far as NASCAR becoming as popular as it was today.
Yeah, I think, as a race fan, I feel like ESPN is what really brought NASCAR to the mainstream. It was the first network to really flag-to-flag coverage of, tons of races, magazine coverage around it, knowledgeable announcers who just, made you feel comfortable and didn't talk down to race fans, but also spoke about racing in terms that other sports fans could really understand. And passionate. And so, as ESPN was starting up and wanting to get, fill hours of programming, long 3-4 hour NASCAR races was a great thing. And so that happened in, the early 80s, mid 80s to 90s. And then we went through in 2000 when we lost the rights for a while. And then when we got them back in 2007, that was awesome. And that's when I really helped bring that coverage back to life here.
And before we get to your current job, what was your mandate as far as covering a race? How would you describe ESPN's approach as far as covering?
I think it's how we cover all events and how we cover everything at ESPN, and it's kind of our mission is to serve sports fans anywhere, anytime. So if it was what I wanted to watch as a race fan, I knew that was really what we wanted to do. Everything we thought about was, what does the race fan want to see? And I think we do that in college football and NFL. What's best for the fan? How can we educate them? How can we get them closer to the sport that they can't see themselves? What can our reporters dig up and tell us about what's going on in the pits because they have access that we don't have? What can our analysts tell us because they've been in the race car, they've been on the field, something that we don't know? And how do we make it entertaining? So I think it's always been pretty easy because I always think, well, what would I want to watch if I were watching this from home? And I think when we keep that in mind, we're a fan too. So as long as that's our mantra, I think it tends to lead us down the road of doing the right thing.
How would you describe your current job?
So now my current job is very different, overseeing a number of different groups. One is our Universal News Group, which gives the editorial guidance for all of our news judgment. What reports are we going with? And in this era of the internet and Twitter and everybody's a reporter out there, we really take pride in making sure that what we report is true, and we vet every single piece of news that we put on our air. So we manage that for the entire company, whether it's our social feeds, the alerts you get on your phone, ESPN.com, or the 6 o'clock Sports Center. So that's one arm, and that's really different. That's very news judgment, a lot more journalism, less fandom. It's more about trying to do the right thing, making sure we're getting the facts out straight, as opposed to sometimes it's entertaining to talk about rumors. From an editorial standpoint, we really try to not talk about rumors. We try to talk about facts and vet our sources. So that's a little different. And then I have the assignment desk, which does the logistics based on providing coverage. So we send out camera crews, and we to whether Sal Palantonio is going to be reporting from the Eagles today or something, we send out a camera crew with him, and we make sure that all the we use different technologies to get that material back here in a more efficient way. If we see, Rex Ryan said something at a press conference, we'll contact that Buffalo station to try to get that in. So it's really gathering material. So that's a little bit more logistics based, but there's a lot of technology there. And in event production, we utilized a lot of technology, just like whether it was in-car cameras or RF technology in the pits. So I've always been a fan of technology, and ESPN has taken technology and and made it really an important part of our production. So the assignment does touch technology in that way. And then we have our talent producers, who are our folks who book all of our guests when we have important coverage, or bring people into ESPN to do the car wash. If Lenny Dykstra has a new book out there and he wants to talk about it, then we'll get him on a number of shows and he'll talk about the book, and we'll get to interview him for various platforms. But one of the times I was most proud of those talent producers, and actually the company as a whole, was when Muhammad Ali passed away. And, such an icon, so important to the world of sports. And we had guests. I remember looking at the set that we had in front of his memorial service, and Jim Brown and
Wow.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Right.
And I mean, it was just, Sugar Ray Leonard, Lennox Lewis. I mean, the amount of guests and the high profile, great people that we had on there to talk about remembering Muhammad Ali. That was our talent producers at their best.
So, I mean, and that takes contacts and takes scrambling, and takes a lot of hustle. Do you have a memorable person who really kind of came through here that really stood out for you as far as, wow, this guy's in our, in
Well, it's funny because, we're around sports all the time.
Right.
So I think we're a little jaded. I remember there were a couple of times when Nomar Garcia Parra worked for us, and I'd be walking down the hall, like checking my email, and I look, hey Nomar, how's it going? And you're just like, wow, did that just happen? Or I walked in from my car with Jerry Rice one day, and I called my husband, like, oh my gosh, I just walked into my, into the office from my car with Jerry Rice. So I think it's the people who aren't sports fans.
Right.
People who really kind of, are interesting, even more interesting to us. So when Bobby Flay was here, which I thought was really funny, we had a number of announcers who brought their kids in to meet him. We had people who talked to him about, oh, my kids are such, fans of your cooking show. And people said, I have your cookbook, and, what are your favorite recipes? And so I thought that was really funny, just as a bystander watching that,
That's funny.
here's Bobby Flay at ESPN, and everybody was really excited about talking to him, so it was funny.
So let's go back to the news component. And you said it, that we carefully vet stories and we don't go by rumors. How does that work, and how much more difficult is it to do that now in the social media age that we live in?
It's very difficult to show restraint, because we're constantly balancing being relevant in the space that our fans are in, and also wanting to vet the news and report what we know to be true. So we're always more comfortable when it's our own reporting, when it's our reporters and it's their sources and we can know who their sources are. We ask for multiple sources. We feel most comfortable. But a lot of times there are sports where other people break the news. TMZ Sports is actually emerging as a real contender out there in the sports news world. Lexicon out there. So at first we may say, oh, it's TMZ reporting. That may not be true, but TMZ is actually, putting a lot of resources into it. And so now all of a sudden we're having to determine, well, what's a viable news organization that has got a great track record, and what can our own reporters go back and even if they can't confirm the news, a lot of times our reporters will know, what, I can't confirm that, but that sounds probably right. And so a lot of times we have to go off the gut of our reporters. But the hard thing is really waiting in this time when everybody wants news right now. We want to get our alerts out. We want to have the bottom line. We want to have our shows talk about it. We want to be relevant. We want to be right. And so for our news group, we really say we want to be, correct first and first next. So being correct is more important than being first.
Can you think of an example? Is there anything that stand out where you guys waited on something? Like when someone...
Deaths are really
Right.
a big one. I know that, when Joe Paterno passed away, there were major news entities or before he passed away, there were major news entities who reported that he passed away.
And
he hadn't. So we're very, very careful, and we really try to stick with, being able to confirm from either the entity that they're working for or a direct family member or the police or something like that. But it is hard when you've got a show live on the air, you've got, a live, page on ESPN.com, and it's out there everywhere that somebody has passed away and we haven't reported it yet. But, we feel very strongly that we need to wait to be correct, because all we have with our fans is our credibility. And you report a couple things that aren't right, and our credibility goes down the tubes. And that's ESPN is a brand. You talk about a brand.
Right.
It's a brand that just goes beyond, I think, this building. It goes beyond. It is the brand of sports, and we have to protect that brand, and we have to make sure that people trust it, and the new generation of people coming up, who I think may not have as many loyalties to brands as maybe we did growing up, that they still find ESPN special, and they know that they can trust our content.
How do you know, let's say a trade or possible or coaches, and someone else is reporting it. Will you say someone else is reporting it, or will you insist that your people nail it down? Because we don't know that outlet's.
No,
100%.
we absolutely. We just rolled out a new attribution policy about a month ago, maybe, and we're always evolving it and trying to figure out how to attribute most effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the past, we had just said if somebody else was reporting something, we would have said it's a media report. Now, if the vertical reports that LeBron James has been traded and we didn't have it and we weren't working on it, then we'll say LeBron James has been traded, and the attribution is the vertical. And so there are certain entities where we will, again, go back to our folks. We'll always try to confirm it first. But like I said before, if we can't confirm, we may not be able to confirm it, but if our reporters know in their gut that, that's probably right. I just got beat on this one. And so then we'll attribute it to that group. But then there's also another thing right now where, there's a Twitter race. Who reported,
right.
Did I report this 6 minutes or 6 seconds before somebody else? Is that a better internet connection? Is that because somebody types faster? Is that because another network doesn't have the same process we have where we ask our reporters to vet through our news desk? So our theory is that if somebody reports something and we are actively in conversation about it, trying to vet it with a reporter, we're not giving that entity the credit. We will say that entity and ESPN because we believe we're getting it at the same time. So, a lot of people may try to poke holes in that and say, well, but they reported it first. They had
Right.
it out on their Twitter feed 6 seconds before you did. But that's where we believe we want to respect the process that we have in place.
So speaking of process, how do you decide what stories you get? What goes into the decision making and the process as far as deciding what stories you're going to cover and then what stories are going to get assigned crews and reporters? How does that work?
Well, so as a news group, we report everything. I mean, because we have a system called EMPS, which is a newswire system, an internal newswire system and communication system that we use that does, we use it for all of our rundowns, for all of the shows. It sends out our own newswires and our sat wires that help let everybody in the company know what material is out there for them and also lets them know what we're reporting, how we're reporting it, what the attribution is, all that, so that we can communicate very widely. Then it's up to the show producers to decide what out of that do they want to put in their given show, whether it's an hour show or a 2-hour show or whatever. Based on the news that we generate, we also then have a coverage and content unit, which is another arm in SportsCenter News. They then decide, okay, do we want to contact the local affiliate and see whether or not they can get us whatever sound from this press conference and send it in? Or let's dispatch our own reporter, our own camera and crew, and we're going to cover this ourselves. Or this is a complicated story or a really interesting story and we want to go do a feature on it. So let's go, spend a couple of days with this storyline and make a feature and put it into a nice, 3 to 6 minute feature that then will run in a couple of days. So we have lots of different ways to cover, but we essentially have our SportsCenter management team, and we can influence it and say, look, this is a big one and we think you've got to cover it. But ultimately, we have a coverage unit that makes those decisions because whereas on the digital side, we have unlimited amount of space. So we can post news stories, we can post features, we can post videos. In the linear television space, there's a finite amount of television shows, and so we want to make sure, and television time. So we want to make sure that we're sending people out to content that we know that the shows are absolutely going to want to use, whether that's a live shot or a feature or a piece.
So as we wrap up here, I'm just kind of, what is the feeling like when SportsCenter breaks a big story? I mean, that's still the ultimate in the business, right?
Yeah.
To break a story. What's that feeling like for people who work on that? And is there one or two that stand out for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm not great at remembering, particular stories that we broke because, I mean, we break a ton of them. Although I would say that while it was a big story in a crazy NBA free agency. I mean, we essentially broke and owned the whole Kevin Durant going to the Warriors. So that was an entire day of NBA coverage that we owned everything. We were ahead of it, and we had a team of reporters who really collaborated with that. That was great. I think the enterprise group, the investigative group, those are the ones that really stand out, I think, when the whole company is like, wow, that was amazing. And the Baylor story with everything that happened there. I mean, that was a really in-depth, long process, and it ended up making change. And I think that's when we realized that our coverage can be really powerful. When an investigation can happen based on ESPN's investigation can ultimately drive change in the industry. That's pretty gratifying. It makes you feel like we're giving something back to the industry, back to the fans, because we're not just here to just show highlights of dunks. We're here to hopefully make a difference in the sporting world.
Right. Thanks, Jill. I appreciate it. Great stuff. Thank you.